Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hey Joe Show.
Hello, hello, hello.
Erin, how are you doing tonight?
Wonderful.
It's wonderful being tired. Yeah.
Okay, it's Sunday night. I'm always tired. That goes without saying.
I was going to say, it is great to be back on the air with you guys after a week off last week. I can't remember. Oh, we were traveling. That's what it was. I spoke at the Dexter Youth Rally.
1 week ago.
Well, you can't. Sometimes it just runs together. So anyhow, I had spoken at a youth rally in Dexter, Missouri. A great time that was had there. And we were actually traveling late at night. So I say late at night. Maybe we were. I can't remember. I really can't. But I know that's what was going on. So anyhow, it's good to be back on the air with you. You're looking at me like I have two heads.
There's no reason to correct you. It's all good.
Well, you know, you're not going to accomplish anything, I guess. So, anyhow, it's good to be back on the air with you. Welcome to another episode of the Hey Joe Show.
I just feel like I heard somebody scream in the background. I'm thinking, are our kids
I think
safe?
you and I both heard our children scream in the background. So,
okay, so I don't know if any of you could tell, but we have new studio lights.
Yeah, I don't know if you can tell that. We're actually a little brighter than we have been. Which may mean
I'm noticing?
What?
It's making me look completely washed out.
No,
we
you look
had
colorful.
A trial
I
run.
see you. You look like you have color.
We should have had a.
You don't look washed out.
Okay. Anyway, you're not a girl or a woman. Or
this
female.
is true. I am not.
Just thought I'd point that out there.
You hit that one right on. Anyhow, we're going to start experimenting with something that we want to tell you about, and of course, we never want to overlook the folks over at the Light Network, and always want to make sure that they know how much we appreciate them.
That was a good segue. New lights, Light Network.
That's right. You meant to do that, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, I know you did. You meant to do that. So anyhow, what we were trying to do is work on a YouTube channel. You know, a lot of these people that are up and coming, the people that know what they're doing, they have a YouTube channel. But tonight,
we want to pretend like
that's
we know
right.
what we're doing.
We want to be somebody one day. But tonight, we're not going to have a YouTube channel. And so the reason is, and my son's over there waving his phone going, Dad, it's not here. It's not live.
Is that what he's saying? I'm over here going.
You're saying get down, get down, get down. And of course, for those of you who do not know anything about the Hey Joe Show studio, you don't know why she would say get down, and we're not going to reveal our secrets to you. We want you to live thinking that this studio is really something grand, okay? And
sure
we know
really
that you do.
That.
But anyhow, we are going to experiment with a YouTube channel, and part of that is because we believe that we'll be able to reach an audience, a different segment of an audience, with this particular show that we have not been able to reach up to this point in time. And so next week or the week after that, we want to encourage you to be looking at YouTube. If you follow YouTube, we want to encourage you to do that for the upcoming Hey Joe Show platform. So there you go. Big news. So tonight, as we get into our show, we're continuing the theme of being intentional. And I told Erin, you know, it's coming to a point in time that we have got to take care of being intentional wives and being intentional mothers. And as I was looking back over our show notes, we have done 3 or 4 episodes on men. And we have done no episodes on women.
Let's be honest and tell everybody why. Because on Sunday of the Hey Joe Show, Joe goes, Erin, it's time to do intentional mothers or wives. And I'm like, I don't operate like you, Joe. I need notice.
I didn't know that she needed more time.
Notice to be able to speak about things.
We're still developing our working relationship together. And I'm coming to understand that she needs time.
You're
and so
just coming to understand that.
here's the beauty of why I'm telling you this. Because tonight we're going to deal with one subject, but the good news is the next Sunday after this, then we're going to deal with intentional wives. And the Sunday after that, we'll deal with intentional mothers. And somewhere in there, we'll deal with intentional women, maybe. because not everybody fits into a wife or a mother, right? And you got
Right.
teenage girls that may want to know, well, where do I fit in that? If I'm not a wife or a mother, where do I fit into that? So, anyhow, we're going to hopefully get into that subject before the season is over. That's the intent. I'm trying to learn how much future planning is needed, and I'll be real with you, I'm not the best at that when it comes to this particular show. So, anyhow, tonight is going to be on a subject that I have actually enjoyed looking at, and it partly goes with what I've studied for this particular week. But beyond this week, it just goes to some concepts that I've run into that really stand out in my mind, and that is the subject of being intentionally obedient. And I don't know what comes to your mind when we start talking about intentional obedience. But one thing that comes out to my mind is this, that, when my parents would tell me to do something, I had to set out to do that. Usually they weren't going to tell me to do something that was already going to be something that I wanted to do. And I would offer this to you. If it were something that I wanted to do, I'm not sure that it could be said to be obedient as much as it would be, Joe, just go ahead and do what you want. Go ahead.
I'm just laughing because you and I were so different, because I made myself my own chore list and made
Yeah.
like
No,
I
we're
took
different.
it upon myself to,
We're different
like
on that one.
vacuum
And maybe
and-
there are some teenagers listening to this. They're like, wow, I'm more like Miss Erin. I make my own to-do list and chore list. And then there's other people like me going, chores? That's something my parents make me do. But see, that's why I love you. You're so good. You actually make me better. And so that helps me. But
Yes, now I just make our kids' chore list.
and then they get to say yes or no, we're going to do it or not. But no, I'm teasing. They don't have that option.
Tammy said hello earlier, and I missed it.
Oh, well,
So I
hello,
was too busy
hello.
worried about the lighting in here. She
That's
said,
right.
enjoyed y'all at Dexter.
We enjoyed being
enjoyed
there
being
and
there.
look
It was a
forward
great
to coming
time.
back in the future. Yeah.
Okay, so took care of that.
So the idea behind intentional obedience, what I want to throw before you is this: that if we don't set out to be obedient, then I would propose this to you, that it's not going to happen by default. In other words, that we're not going to accidentally be obedient to the will of God any more than a child is going to accidentally be obedient to their parents. And again, I would go back to, if it is what the child wants to do anyway, then it really isn't obedience. It's just doing what you want to do. From a standpoint of being Jesus people, followers, Christians, the idea is that our will eventually doesn't become where God changes to fit our will, but where our will lines up behind Him, where we truly want what His will is. That's the transformation process. That's the do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed idea by the renewing of your mind. In other words, you are supposed to line up behind His will, not Him change His will to fit what you already wanted to do. So if that's the case, then that's got to be on purpose. I've got to set out to do that. That's not going to just come naturally, where an individual wants to deny themselves and deny their wants and to deny their wishes, and they just line up them behind God. I would offer this to you, that takes intentionality. And one of those passages that comes to my mind that I have marked here in my text is Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 15 and following, where Moses is coming to the end of the book of Deuteronomy. Their children of Israel are about to go into the land of promise, but Moses is not going to lead them. We all know that Moses wasn't able to lead them because of his lack of obedience, because he let his frustration in the people get the best of him. And so God would not even allow Moses to be overlooked in that. But in this particular chapter, Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 15 and following, the Bible reads this way: "See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, and death and adversity, in that I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in His ways, and to keep His commandments and His statutes and His judgments, that you may live and multiply, and that the Lord your God may bless you in the land where you are entering to possess it. But if your heart turns away, and you will not obey, but are drawn away and worship other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall surely perish. You will not prolong your days in the land where you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess it." Now, that was just one occasion towards the end of the book of Deuteronomy where Moses would call the children of Israel to obedience. Now, I would offer this to you once again, that if obedience were easy and was not intentional, then why the need to call them to obey? And that obviously then by default says that there was obviously a need to remind, there was a need to continue to encourage and to exhort, that they would bend their will, they would bend their walk to fit that of what God would require and what God wants. I would offer this to you that is not different when it comes to the New Testament. In Romans chapter 6, there's a concept about you and I having a choice when it comes to obedience to God. And that concept comes in play in chapter 6 of the book of Romans, beginning with verse 12, where it says, "Therefore do not let sin reign in your mortal body, so that you obey its lust. And do not go on presenting the members of your body to sin as instruments of unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness to God." They'll go on to talk about verse 16, "Do you not know that when you present yourself to someone as slaves for obedience, you are slaves of the one whom you obey, either of sin, resulting in death, or of obedience, resulting in righteousness?" And here's why I say this, I guess, because of all the topics that we could talk about when it comes to intentionality and being purposed in life, the question really comes down to, have I been intentional about my obedience today? Have I been intentional about my obedience this past week? Have I been intentional about obedience in my life this year?
I really don't think people stop to think a question like that per se.
They probably don't.
I mean, really, I think I think there are times that we pause and think about other things and ask ourselves other questions, and I could be wrong. So if you have a different opinion, feel free to chime in, but I just don't. I don't know. That's not something I think to myself, and I just can't help but think the majority of people aren't stopping to think that.
Right, and I don't think that you're wrong in that, but that's why
we should, though.
This concept is kind of I guess you could say it's so common sense that we've overlooked it, and that's a shame for us. But I would tell you this, that you really understand it when you are a parent with a child, and your child may throw something at you when it comes to their obedience and say, especially when they just messed up or did something maybe that they knew was against what you wanted or had a negative outcome. The idea is, but Dad, I didn't mean to do that. And I've heard that before from our children. I'm sure you have, Erin, heard that from our children, but I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to do that, right? And so one of the sayings, I guess, that I have been regurgitating, and I don't know if it's from me. I don't think it is. I don't know. Maybe I'm becoming like my parents. If so, that's a good thing in my book. But the idea is this, that yes, you didn't mean to do that, but the question is, did you mean not to? Did you set out to did you purpose for that not to happen? Did you purpose for there not to be that potential of outcome or consequence? And I think that's a concept that obviously kids struggle with, but I'm not so sure that we as adults don't struggle with, where people might say, well, I didn't mean not to be obedient to God. But the question follows, yeah, but did you mean to be obedient to God? Or were you just kind of existing, and then all of a sudden, I recognized, oh, wait a minute, I'm not being obedient to God. And the idea is this, does God really want us to exist in a relationship with Him that maybe by chance we will fall into the obedience category, or maybe by chance we will fall into the sin category? Or does He really have more in line and more planned and more purposed for those who will call Him Father? And by default, I believe the answer is He's got more planned. That's why you see these passages, and you see individuals in the Bible that are great examples. I had over here in my Bible, over in Acts chapter 5, I believe it was, looking at the expansion of the early church. And you had individuals in Acts chapter 4 and in Acts chapter 5 that looks at obedience to God as a decision that's already been made in advance, regardless of who is going to threaten them. In other words, when faced with imprisonment, The choice of intentional obedience had already been decided for them. That's why in Acts chapter 4, you find Peter and John answering those who had told them not to go preach anymore. They would say, whether it's right in the sight of God to give heed to you rather than to God, you be the judge, for we cannot stop speaking about what we have seen and heard. And I would offer this to you. That comes from Acts chapter 4, verses 19 through 20. The idea was they had purpose that they were going to obey God, regardless of what it cost them. And Peter would say the same thing over in Acts chapter 5, verse 29. But Peter and the apostles answered, we must obey God rather than men. And I know these passages seem common to us. But what I want to offer to you, and I could go to the Old Testament book of Daniel with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being threatened to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar, or else they were going to be thrown into the fiery furnace, right? The idol that had been set up by Nebuchadnezzar, or they were going to be thrown into the fiery furnace. And the idea was this: we're not going to. Daniel purposed that he wasn't going to defile himself by the king's choice meat and wine. And you go back and you look in the scripture over and over again, and what we see, I think, is something that is missing oftentimes in 21st century Christianity, and that is that those decisions were made in advance. They were not they didn't make them in the heat of the moment. There's no indication from that through the scripture. And the only way that I know to rectify that situation in my mind is that's because they were intentional about their obedience.
Right.
It wasn't a matter of will we be obedient. The decision had already been made. Yes.
Well, there's just a couple comments here that I wanted to point out. One said present or present is a key word that shows we're intentional. We prepare for a presentation. I like that. And then also another comment says, I struggle with this and never thought about it in those ways.
Well, and I appreciate the individual who said that we present. Obviously, that individual is going back to Romans chapter 6 because the choice is ours. Either we present ourselves as slave to sin or we present ourselves as slaves to righteousness. But God doesn't force you to present yourself to either one, but you will end up presenting yourself to one or the other.
Right.
That's not an option. There is no option to remain neutral. And for the individual who said that they struggle with it, but they never thought of it in these terms, I don't think you're alone in that.
No, because like I said, it goes back to my comment earlier. I was like, huh.
I think it's one of those things that we kind of, as we wake up daily, go to school, go about our job, go about family business, I'm not real sure that we ask ourselves, have I been intentional about my obedience today? And
I agree.
And that's a different question than that I just happened to be obedient today.
Right.
Any more than we would say, well, did you purpose to do well at school? Did you purpose to do well at your job? Did you purpose, if you're on a diet, did you purpose to stick to the diet? If you're in a daily Bible reading plan, did you purpose to stay in tune with your daily Bible reading? And I just think that sometimes we look at obedience as a default. And what I'm trying to tell you is this: if it were a default, there would not be so many admonishing passages that would command it.
Right.
And therefore, then I've got to choose whether or not to obey that command.
Yeah, I do feel like the more you are intentional about it and the more you practice it, the more it does become just your way of life. But you always have to have those checkpoints to make sure that you're keeping on track. Just like, I hate to use this analogy, but like a diet. Once you start eating a certain healthier way, once you get used to it, you automatically eat that way. But every once in a while, you need to step back and evaluate, am I still where I need to be?
And so maybe that's a great segue into some practical, right? Practical. You didn't even know you did that, but you are so smooth. You just practically transitioned for us. And so here's the deal, some checkpoints. So as I go throughout my day and I say I want to be intentional about obedience, you know what I'm noticing about these new lights is it makes my face look like beet red.
Hey, Joe. Hey, Joe. Your face always looks beet red every week.
I mean, look at that. That is beet red. And I'm not even like hot, although it is starting to get hot in our studio already from the changing of the weather. You wouldn't think it would, but it is. But anyhow, all right, back to
just noticed that. Okay.
Back to the real issue at hand, and that is this: checkpoints. So what are some practical things that you and I can discuss in the sense of
after I put makeup on your face to tone it down?
I guess you're going to put foundation
like,
on. Erin
no.
has threatened to do makeup to me before. And I'm
Well,
saying
it's all
no.
for art.
It's all for
It's
art.
for the
Well, what I'll do is I'll change the angle of the lights, and therefore it will not hit me the way that it does. Thanks. Somebody
Yes,
said, yes, it
yes it
does. Make
does.
me
Yes it
look
does
beat
what?
red. Makes me look beat red. I'm telling you. It does. So here's the
Okay.
deal. When it comes
Practical.
to
All
when it
right.
comes to application, right?
Okay.
What are some ways then that we and maybe others who listen to this or watch this can have, I guess you could say, checkpoints for if we are being intentional or not? To ask ourselves, am I being intentional? Was I intentional today? And so I guess the question is this: what does it look like to be intentional in my obedience? What does it look like? And
Oh,
I'm
are you
asking
asking
that. I know
me?
I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm having a conversation with you, and I think somebody on Facebook's having a conversation with you. So,
So I'm divided. You have to repeat that question again.
whatever. If you're not paying attention, why would anybody else listening to this pay attention?
They are paying attention. That's
I
why I'm
mean,
conversing with them.
oh, okay. They are paying attention. I like the way you said that. So the idea is this: what are some checkpoints? How do I know? I want to know I'm being intentional about obedience. But what does that look like?
Checklist.
Does it? Does
Yes.
it look like a checklist? I mean, that's
No,
right up your
no,
alley.
really. I think it depends on the individual. I think the personalities that checklists work, it'll work. People that don't do well checklists, not so
Well,
much.
can you use a checklist for obedience?
Well, yeah, because I mean, you could set aside a time like at night before you go to bed to be like, okay,
Where you evaluate yourself?
evaluation time. Maybe
Okay.
that's better than checklist.
All right. So,
Evaluation.
if we were going to have evaluation time, what would be included in what we would evaluate? I think you said something that I think was very telling, and you didn't even know you said it, I don't think.
Again,
But,
yes, I'm 2 for 2.
but it's the idea of
All
this.
right.
If I'm going to be intentional about obedience, right, what areas would I want to classify obedience? And I know we're not like, well, if you're obedient in these 5 areas, then therefore you're obedient to God. We understand that obedience to God is a way of life, okay? Please don't write in, on Facebook, you people don't know. We understand that, okay? But we are wanting to see whether or not there was intentional obedience. So what could we do to see if there was intentional obedience? And so I'll throw out
I mean,
one.
I wouldn't do that every day of your life because then it would become like
I checked it off. Therefore, I was
right.
obedient.
No,
Right.
no, no. This is more just a evaluation every once in a
Right.
while.
I'll say. So here's an evaluation.
How am I
Did
doing?
I set aside any time today, specifically to thank God? I think that's obedient. And some might even say the idea is set aside time individually to pray. Obviously, how can I have a relationship with the Father if I'm not talking to the Father? And I think hand in hand with that would be this. If I'm talking to the Father through prayer, then am I allowing him to talk to me through his word? So did I set aside any time for Bible study that day?
Yeah, someone also said, I like the thought of practicing the pause, maybe several times throughout the day, pause and take evaluation.
I think that's accurate. And I would offer this to you that as you grow, as I continue to grow, my moments of pause oftentimes come after my interaction with people. Especially, and I don't know why it is, but especially if I reflect on the situation and I have maybe in my mind I'm saying, I could have handled that better. Those are oftentimes the moments where I reflect on that, saying, "Man, did I talk about Jesus at all? Was I complaining about my circumstances, or did I show that God's still in control and God still has this?" Or did I make it all about me and I forgot that? And so in that moment, maybe, and so where that individual said practice moments of pause, I think there's a lot to that's very good and needs to be considered. So maybe that's where we're at, is don't have an evaluation only at night, but have evaluation along the way. So I would offer this. Did I set aside time? Was I intentional about communication with God? Would be a way to say that. The idea would be, did I communicate with him in prayer? Did I allow him to communicate to me through study of his word? That concept of pause and evaluate after interaction with individuals. Did I in any way direct them to glorify God? After that conversation, did I draw them closer to glorifying God? Would they even want to know my God that I claim to follow? Or did I make it about me? I think that's crucial. I think there was a comment that came across Facebook that somebody made a suggestion about, not a checklist, but ways to discern whether or not there was intentional obedience in a day.
I'm not seeing that comment on my side.
Okay, I thought one came through on the on the iPad.
It is. It just came. It went to yours first. It's delayed on mine. It doesn't like me as well. Oh, okay.
So what's that one say?
All right. Have I made any sacrifices today? God's people in the Old Testament sacrificed daily.
I think that's a great concept. What did I do today outside of myself for His glory? Sacrificing could be time. Sacrificing could be situations. Sacrificing could be giving financially to those who are in need. Sacrificing could be a lot of things. From our standpoint, obviously, we're not called to make any sacrifice at a temple. Jesus is the perfect sacrifice, but the point is well made, and that is my life daily is about glorifying God. And so what did I do that day with maybe what I have been blessed with? What did I do that day with my time? And I think sometimes those are some hard questions to answer because, we look at so many things regarding time as it pertains to obedience. And the idea of a man who goes to work is saying, well, am I not sacrificing? Am I not being obedient in going to work? Or a woman who manages the home or provides the care and attention that her family needs in the atmosphere. The idea is she not honoring God and obeying God in that? And I would say, yes, she is. And yes, he is in that. So that's all part of it too. That's why you cannot summarize obedience in a checklist concept. Obviously, that would be more in line with an Old Testament idea. And so we're not trying to do that, but what we are trying to do is this. If I'm going to evaluate at the end of the day whether or not I was intentional in my obedience, then there's got to be some reflecting. All right, and there's got to be
that was actually my point earlier with like some people who are checklist people, not like every little thing you did that way, but like, was my heart in the right place today? Did I take time to think about, is this an opportunity for me to be obedient? Because I think we kind of put obedience in a little box actually per se, and we kind of put it over here and this is what it is, but there's a broader scene to what obedience is and just this little box over here.
Well, and I think you're right in that, and a lot of people would look at, was I obedient, and they would equate that to, did I go to worship?
Or even in everyday life, did I not break the law? Did I not speed? Did I not
I didn't get arrested today.
Did I not yell at my kids? Did I,
Right. I agree with that. You're like, no, let's not talk about that.
No, let's skip that one.
But the idea is, obviously, we're not talking about making a checklist. We're talking about a time of reflection. And if I'm going to be intentional in my obedience, then I have got to spend time asking myself, was I intentional? And if not, where can I improve? Where can I change? Where can I grow? And that's all we're saying on this particular episode of the Hey Joe Show, is that when you consider being intentional, it's not just about being intentionally a plugged-in dad and plugged-in husband and a plugged-in mom, plugged-in wife. It's also about this idea of, when it comes to my walk with God, am I being intentional in the way that I approach my obedience before God? Because still, the idea is this: I will be a slave of the one whom I present myself to. And the question then ultimately is, who am I presenting myself to? And will I be a slave of righteousness or a slave of sin? And I cannot claim to be a God follower if I am presenting myself to sin, as a slave to sin. But in the same sense, I cannot just pretend that it will accidentally happen that I will present myself as a slave of righteousness. That is not a default. That is not going to just happen by slipped right into that one. It's going to happen because I have purposed in my heart to follow the will of God. So that's what I wanted to say tonight, and that's all I have for the show. Erin, any other comments?
Look at you. We are almost at 30 minutes exactly.
Well, even we can pull that off sometimes, can't we? We want to thank those again who have joined us live on Facebook tonight, and those who will be downloading and listening to this on the Light Network or at your podcast source of choice. We want to thank you for tuning in. Always, we want to invite you to go to thelightnetwork.tv, check out the family of podcasts there. On the subscription options for your podcast, we hope that the Hey Joe Show is a podcast that you have subscribed to, and if you will, we need you to review the Hey Joe Show
but only
on
if
your.
It's a good review.
Yeah, but of course, Don't leave negative reviews, right? But
I
only
mean,
positives.
not that any of our, listeners would leave a negative review.
Yeah, but we need you to go in and review it because that does help you move up in the rankings and allows your podcast maybe to get recognized, to be heard by some who may not otherwise. Well, the idea is this: the more people that see it, the more opportunity it is to change lives, or to at least affect lives, affect families, affect teenagers.
So basically, if you want people to know Jesus, you better do it.
Go and review our show. Anyhow, obviously check us out on Facebook at Kyle Publications. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. Also look us up on the internet, kylepublications.org. Check us out for all your family's needs, devotionals, Bible studies, encouragement. We would love to be a regular source for you when you start thinking, what do I need? What can I use to strengthen my walk with the Lord? So, Erin, that's all that I have.
That's it.
Thank you all for listening in. We're going to go ahead and say that we are out.
Please hang up and try again.